So today's presentation is about the relationships between research integrity and open science. And as we shall see, the connections are many, but not as straightforward as it may seem, because as the question indicates, it is not so obvious that open science is always sound or good quality science, and in the other way, sound science is not always open science. So the links are very should be reflected upon. So this presentation is, as you all know, in the framework of the For You Plus Alliance, so there is this institutional framework, and open science plays a very important role. Today's presentation is part of a series on open science, and we are almost at the end of this year's series. So, and you can find all the sessions which are registered. Sorry. So the presentation will have three parts. I'm going to introduce the topic of research integrity and its links with open science. Then Paola will go on with entering into the connections between the two topics, and Anne-Catherine will end the presentation asking difficult questions. So first, about research integrity. What is it about? Research integrity is about research process and outcomes. You may ask questions about research integrity relative to teaching, but they are derived from questions relative to the research process and research outcomes. An important aspect of the topic is that research integrity is different from ethics. In the next slide, I will show you some documents and some institutions relative to research integrity. And you will see that from the surface, so to speak, the codes of conduct, the codes of research integrity may resemble codes of ethics, but the topics are entirely different. Research integrity is about how you do research, how you write your research project, PhDs, scientific papers, books, and so on. There is some overlaps between research integrity and ethics, but the core of research integrity is just research, so to speak. So research conducted according to the research integrity principle is just good research, sound research, good quality research. So in a way, there is no point about research integrity, except that sound research is very difficult. Of course, some voluntary misconducts occur, like falsification of data, fabrication of data, plagiarism. These are the well-known FFP. So these occur, of course, but there are also errors and bias which may threaten sound science, good science, the quality of research outcomes. And in between the voluntary misconduct and errors, involuntary errors, there is a gray zone which goes from voluntary misconducts to, well, good faith errors. And many problems of research integrity occur within the gray zone and are very, very difficult to identify, to qualify, and to correct. So, as sound research is very difficult to perform, research integrity, which is in a way obvious because it is only good research, it is not so obvious. And one main reason why research integrity may be difficult to implement is that it depends on what sociologists and anthropologists call cultures. As you may have noticed, in entering a PhD program and mostly research laboratory, people working in research are working in very specific ways, are interacting in very specific ways, and all these interactions with materials, but also with papers, with the bibliography, and also with colleagues, principal investigators, supervisors, and so on. All these make up a culture of research, and cultures are well known to be very difficult to understand and to analyze. And these cultures of research, which are very different from one discipline to another one, these cultures involve both institutions at every scale, the research laboratory, but also the university, and even the state, national state, and also all individual participants. So all that is very complicated, and this is why first, sound research is difficult. I cannot insist too much on this problem, but also this is why it is very difficult to tackle the topic of research integrity and its relationships with open science, because cultures are relatively opaque, and in order to reflect on the interaction between research integrity and open science, we should go into each different disciplinary culture of research. So this is very difficult, and I want to emphasize that there is no obvious principle connecting research integrity and open science. I think this is the main message of this presentation. So institutions are part of the cultures of research, and they are not passive with respect to research integrity and open science, of course. So you have many offices in the US, in the UK, but also associations of professionals, research integrity officers in Europe are gathered within NREO, the Research Integrity Officer, European Network of Research Integrity Officers. So I am the Research Integrity Officer of Sorbonne University. And we do have many institutions about research integrity, and we also have codes like the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which you can find easily. And the NREO has gathered all resources. And this is the last point of the slide. I don't want to be too long, but you can find many documents about research integrity on the NREO webpage. And this is very useful. So the point here is that institutions are very concerned about research integrity, and they do act in favor of research integrity, either via documents and teaching, but also via research integrity officers who are dealing with misconduct. So the major challenge, both for institutions and also for individual researchers and PhD students, including PhD students, the main challenge is that there are many differences among disciplines. And as you know, there are many disciplines from Latin, because at Sorbonne we have Latin and Greek, ancient Greek, to particle physics, biology, anything you can think about. And of course, the research cultures and outcomes are very different among these disciplines. And of course, the problems relative to research integrity and also to open science are different, are truly different among disciplines. So this is a major challenge. Here I listed some more specific challenges. First, the reproducibility challenge. It is well known. There are a lot of scientific papers about reproducibility and the problems of non-reproducible outcomes of research. This is important in psychology, as you may know, but also in cancer research, and virtually in every domain, in every experimental domain. And it is a well-known major threat against the validity of scientific outcomes, of research outcomes. And with respect to this challenge, open science is supposed to be part of a plausible solution. Of course, it cannot be all the solution, but you know, opening corpora of data and also of protocols may be a solution to the reproducibility challenge, but this challenge takes different forms from psychology to cancer research. And of course, the solutions cannot be the same in the different disciplines. What about plagiarism? And what about the relationships we have towards bibliography, toward past papers in our different domains? How do we conceive of our relationships to data, to bibliography, to the state of the art? As you know, establishing the state of the art is the first task in entering a new research. And at this very first step, you may have problems, voluntary or not. With respect to the bibliography, you may wish to, not to read too much about the papers you don't agree with. And so plagiarism and more generally our relationships to bibliography and to the state of the art in our different domains is a place where problems of research integrity may occur, because we don't like papers disagreeing with us. And so we are sometimes willing not to consider them. And this is a first problem. And open science here may be part of the solution, because when all relevant papers are available, easily available, and freely available, this may encourage researchers to take them into account. But it is difficult, as I already said, research is difficult. And even this part, which in some disciplines is considered not so important, the bibliography and the establishing of the state of the art, even here, a sort of reflexive stance is very useful and even mandatory. So the point here is that because of the differences among disciplines, there cannot be all-purpose recommendations. And so research integrity is always domain really dependent, relative to and even to subdomains of research. So recommendations are always, awkward for insiders. There may be interesting and useful from the outside of research, of everyday research, but what is important is what you do on an everyday basis, how we interact with materials and peers and papers, and this cannot be, regimented in one document, in one general document. So research integrity is more about how we reflect on our research practices, and it documents, codes of research integrity may help, but they have to be transposed, so to speak, at every in every subdomain of research. So my last slide about research integrity is about the identification of risks, because as I emphasized, of course, there are voluntary misconducts, fabrication of data, falsification, and plagiarism. But there are also errors, involuntary errors, and bias. And as I said, there is a gray zone in between. And the gray zone, as the name indicates, is difficult to analyze, and even it is difficult to be aware of these difficulties. And so research integrity is much about identification of risks and about finding out the right attitude to have about our relationships with bibliography, with colleagues, peers, supervisors, and so on. So risks occur when the interactions are difficult, when it is difficult for you to access bibliography, when your relationships with colleagues and peers are difficult, are awkward, when you don't have money to buy the reactants you need, for instance, when you don't have money to travel and talk to an interesting colleague, and so on. So when there are difficulties, there are risks of research misconducts. And the key point is that we are not always aware of these difficulties. And so vigilance and dialogue are major ingredients of risk avoidance. This is my main message about research integrity. In general, it is about talking to people, not necessarily your supervisors, of course, but talking to someone you trust. Research integrity is much about trust. And research integrity is also about a sort of reflexive stance, reflexive attitude about everyday practices. It is not abstract at all. It is about everyday practices, everyday interactions with materials, papers, people, and open science may be a tool towards better practices, but as I said, it is not the only tool, and it is not a magic wand at all. At least if it doesn't go together with a reflexive stance. This is why I emphasize reflexive open science practices. It is a big expression, but I think reflexivity, vigilance, and being aware of potential risks is key for individual researchers to improve research practices. And open science, as I said, may help at the condition that it is not conceived as the only tool for improving research practices. And this is what we are going to see with Paola and Anne-Catherine. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anouk, for your presentation. I try to share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Here. Okay. Yes, what I will try to do is to describe the connection between open science and research integrity, and how open science can help and favor research integrity, even if this is not the whole story, as Anouk told us. During the previous seminar, the previous presentations, we have seen that in the scientific, in the conduct of the scientific research, there are some problems. And one of these problems is the problem of access. We have an accessibility problem. We have seen that institutions spend more than 10 billion euros, $10 billion a year for subscription. And for accessing 2 million articles. This is the yearly production in terms of number of articles. And we have also seen that only 20% of these 2 million articles are open. That means that 80% of the research of the article produced by our researchers, by our institutions, is closed behind paywalls and can be accessed only by the institution who pay for a subscription. We have another problem, and this is a reproducibility one. You know perhaps this very, very famous Lancet retraction. This was the retraction of the article on the use of hydroxychloroquine for treatment of COVID-19. This article was published in the period of health emergency. The scientific community asked for data underlying this research and the results of this research. The data were supplied for a third party, for a firm, Sargesphere, and this third party refused to supply data for reproducibility and for verifying that the results were robust results and reliable. And the answer was that such transfer would violate client agreements and confidentiality requirements. So this is a problem, this problem of the reproducibility that we can see outlined in this article published in Nature a couple of years ago. This is the result of a questionnaire distributed to more than 1,500 scientists, and it was about the possibility of the reproducibility of their own research or of someone else's research. And here you can see very clear that reproducibility is a problem in science. And then I will mention another problem. This is more a cultural one, and this is the problem of negative results. Scientists, researchers don't accept negative results. And this is the explanation given from Francis Bacon. It is the peculiar and perpetual error of the human understanding to be more moved and excited by affirmative than by negatives. And this can lead to fraud, to misconduct, and so on. Negative results are interpreted as a failure and not as the norm in science. The results of this problem is a hasty publication of unripe research, and the consequence in many cases is a retraction. And this can lead to a distrust of science. This is what we have seen in the previous presentation of this seminar series. And I want to recall here the definition of open science that we have given and accepted. Open science is the practice of science in such a way that others can collaborate and contribute, where research data, lab notes, and other research processes are freely available under terms that enable reuse, redistribution, and reproduction of the research and its underlying data and methods. So accessibility, reusability, reproducibility are the main, the keywords of this, in this definition of open science. If we look at this umbrella concept, open science, under which we can find open access, open infrastructure, open data, open labs, open notebook, open evaluation, open source, open peer review, and so on, we see that this way to do science, to perform science, can lead to more accessibility, transparency, and reproducibility of science. Open science can foster research integrity and trust through the FAIR principle applied to data and metadata, to data management, and metadata can enhance integrity. Open science can favor and foster more accessibility and transparency, and data sharing can favor reproducibility of research. And here is my last slide. This is another definition of open science. We see here the values of open science and the principle. And in the definition, we can read open science sets a new paradigm that integrates into the scientific enterprises practices for reproducibility, transparency, sharing, and collaboration, resulting from the increased opening of scientific content, tools, and process. This was my last slide, and as I told you and Anouk told you, this is not the whole story. So I give the floor to Anne-Catherine.
Thank you, Paola. Can you just
yes,
switch off? So I will try to share my screen. Did I? Do you see it?
Yes, we do.
So I just go. Well, let me just pick up. Thank you, Paola, and thank you, Anouk, for your presentation. And just let me pick up on what Paola said. Basically, open science fosters research integrity and trust. How does it do this? Open science embraces, we saw it, the FAIR principles, which themselves enhance integrity. These FAIR principles are the preconditions of transparency, accessibility, and of course, reproducibility. So, however, open science does not, in and of itself, guarantee integrity, nor does it guarantee quality of science. A science can be weak or lacking and yet be open. Open science criteria are not relevant for all disciplines. What does reproducibility, for example, mean in philosophy or in history? Anouk has pointed these differences among disciplines in her presentation previously. And finally, just because some research outputs are not open to the public doesn't necessarily mean that they lack integrity. As you know, there are some research areas, for example, in medicine, where research outputs can be made public, cannot be made public due to privacy concerns. Look at this young man who is casually eliminating the Petri dish that probably doesn't fit his program. Of course, we know that open science does not stop an unscrupulous researcher from eliminating an output that doesn't fit his hypothesis. But nevertheless, open science allows the reproducibility which will validate or, at the opposite, invalidate the science in question. Opening up research data makes it easier to track down scientific misconduct or fraud. And this brings me to the question of the publish and perish mindset and to the pressure weighing, particularly on young researchers. They are working in a brutally competitive environment where the intrinsic value of their research counts less, sometimes, not always, than the impact factor of the scientific journal in which it will be published. The fact is that today, at least in some fields, the researcher is assessed on the basis of where and how many articles he has published, rather than on the intrinsic value of his research. The situation just described led to the Doha Declaration and more recently to the Hong Kong Principles and many other ongoing initiatives that call for a change in research assessment. What is DORA? The Declaration on Research Assessment recognizes the need to improve the ways in which researchers and the outputs of scholarly research are evaluated. Specifically, they recommend not to use journal-based metrics as a surrogate measure to assess for career, funding, or otherwise. The Hong Kong Principles go even further. By promoting open science and the assessment of the researcher on the basis of responsible practices, they give value to all the research process, regardless of the results. All of this implies a fundamental change in our scientific culture and what we value. Let me give the example of negative results that about which Paola already talked. As you know, a negative result is a result that does not validate the hypothesis initially formulated. These results are invisible in the scientific literature. It's very rare that an article describes a failure, a false lead, or a dead end. But still, it's the way research is going on. However, these negative results may be of interest to other scientists and in some cases are worth sharing. Publishing the negative results will also allow to avoid the embellishment of the article, where you finally choose only the data that will perfectly fit with your hypothesis. And as you know, from data embellishment to fraud, there is only one small step. Another approach that has emerged is the idea in the term slow science, in opposition to the fast-track race for results that characterize the current system. Let me quote the Slow Science Manifesto. Science needs time to think, science needs time to read, and time to fail. We do need time to think, we do need time to digest, we do need time to misunderstand each other especially when fostering close dialogue between humanities and natural sciences, and science needs time. At the end of the day, we need a radical paradigm shift with regards to the whole scientific process, as well as research evaluation. Integrity is more than the absence of breaches of integrity and requires a significant cultural change. This doesn't concern only the researcher, but all the actors from the scientific community and also the funders of science. We can see that it's beginning to happen, but it will be up to you and to all of us to go further. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anne-Catherine.
Thank you. I try to. Sorry. Oh, I did not try. So maybe.
Okay. Yes.
Let's go.
Yes. Do you have some questions? Feel free to ask them in the chat. You can also turn on your microphone. We have one. We have a practical case in the chat. I have asked the corresponding author of a recent article published in JAMA Internet to perform a very simple complementary analysis on host data. There is no statement regarding open access to data in this article. My letter was published, but the author's answer invaded my question. I contacted the author directly, copied to JAMA Internet, and he answered that he could not access the data anymore, which of course I do not believe. After a new email exchange, he asked me to stop contacting him. JAMA Internet has not reacted to our mail exchanges so far. Can the journal require the author to give me access to the data?
Maybe I can answer, Christian. Hi, Christian. I think that we may try an official letter from Sorbonne, which may work in this case because journals are supposed to answer positively requirements of this sort, and they may be helped by institutions.
Thank you.
With some publicity to the case.
Thank you. Should that mail be signed by the president of the university?
Yes.
Okay.
Via the Direction des Affaires Juridiques.
Okay. So, in other words, a journal is compelled to obtain the source data from any author?
No, journals are entirely free, especially commercial journals, are entirely free to deal with, they do have their own policies, but if some publicity is given to the case to a sort of concealment of data, I think that this is bad advertisement for the journal.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question. Can you explain what is slow science again, please?
Yes, maybe, and Paola will probably complete. I mean, slow science is not somebody new. It's probably a reaction to the system now, and it was a manifesto that was written by a few researchers in Berlin a few years ago, and it's more a reaction of the current system, where you are the most of the time in a competition and in a race to publish as soon as possible, as quick as possible. And I would say it was more a way to change the system, but it's new. Actually, it's not a new idea. It's more a reaction to the system that sometimes can lead also to misconducts and to a way of making science that can be problematic. I don't know, Paola, if you want to say something more about...
No, it's okay for me. I have to add something to the previous question. I mean, it depends on the policies of the different journals, and the policies are on the website of the journal. But it is a best practice, very, very common today, that underlying data should be accessible. That means they should not be open, but they should be accessible, and this accessibility should be favored and should be granted by journals, by editorial teams. So this was my contribution.
And we have a last question. Could you please explain once again how DORA helps in research in brief? And Anouk wrote in the chat, DORA helps improving hiring process in research institutions. It may have an indirect effect on research practices via hired individuals. Thank you, Anouk.
Yes, maybe I can just, the DORA principle, you can see, you can go back to the slide and maybe to the website of the DORA declaration. The main principle is to say that to assess research or to assess researchers, you shouldn't take only, you shouldn't base you only on the impact factor and especially on the bibliometrics, on the metrics. You have to take in account the real quality and the intrinsic quality of the research. And by now, especially in a few disciplines, it's not the case. The impact factor is one of the most important factors, and you know that the impact factor is not an impact factor on the article or on the research, it's an impact factor of the journal. So it doesn't say a lot about the quality of the research that you are doing, actually. And DORA has to do with the huge research assessment system. And of course, this assessment system is what is making the system being very difficult by now, because the most of the research assessment systems throughout the world are related to this way of thinking on metrics. And so if you change the research assessment system, you can change the whole system, and you can slow down actually when you're making science, and you can see how you can also change the way you are sharing your data, the way you are publishing your data, and so on. We saw that in the presentation, and I see probably in the 3 part of the presentation, that in the ways for publication of the data and of the results and of the research outputs, you have really a competition, and this competition can lead to misconducts and to frauds. It's not the It's not the only reason, but it's one of the main reasons.
Yes, this is also that has something to do with the good art law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So performance-based research systems are based on measure. Measure become the target, and not science development or robust results, and this is a problem.
Thank you, Anne-Catherine. Thank you, Paola. There's a question. I wonder if there are any regulations or practices in Europe to handle make-compatible intellectual property registration from research and open science. Do you think the protection of ideas impacts on the quality of publications?
I can provide a partial answer to this question. There is no law or regulation because research integrity is not about laws, it is about practices. And the grain of research practices is much too fine for laws to apply. So this is one important point. And the second point is that lawyers usually are not educated in science, and so they don't really know about science and scientific and research practices. And so you may see the two domains of law and science as almost entirely separated, except a very small overlapping zone relative to intellectual property. But this overlapping zone is too small to be efficient in everyday practices. So, and as I have said already, recommendations, codes of conduct, and so on are only abstract indications, so to speak, but they don't really, well, they may impact everyday practices, but they cannot impact everyday practices unless individual researchers, students, PhD students, and postdocs, and also PIs, unless all these people are aware of what it means to do sound science, sound research, good quality research. So regulations are one thing, but the reality of research is largely different.
Maybe I can add to it that, of course, the intellectual property issues are very important, but we have to see how we deal with it, because you know that now in Europe, especially it's fostered by the Coalition S, you have a movement for the called the right retention strategy, encouraging the researchers when they're publishing not to give all the rights to the publishers. And we have to be act very carefully with the data. When you are when you are publishing, do not give the right to your data to the publisher. You have to make them accessible. You have to put them, as Paola said, to either to share them immediately or to make sure that they will be accessible on demand. But do not give the right to the publisher as an exclusive right to your data, because that's not very open science. And on this issue, I would also add that the fact that sometimes open science is seen as a threat for the results and the outcomes, but at the same time, when the results are published and are opened, of course, that can be used by some other people when they're shared. But on the other side, the rights are affiliated to your science project. And so you can also claim the responsibility for these data when you have shared them and opened them, more than you would you could do it when they are totally closed. I don't know if that was actually the question or not, but if you want, just maybe, Gabrielle, you can maybe just ask further.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. How do we deal with privacy issues, anonymity of participants' data in open science?
Perhaps I can give an answer. When you start your research, you have to speak with the DPO or with the ethics committee, and you should treat your data, for example, you should anonymize them or pseudonymize them. Open science, data in open science are not open data. They are accessible, and this accessibility should be granted with all measures for protection of participants' data and of with all ethical how do I say that? According to the rule, all ethical rules, but they should be accessible. So if they are anonymized, they can be accessible, not open, and they can be provided if someone requests to access them.
Okay, thank you. And Anouk adds practical exercises, reflects on the following questions for your own domains. How do you consider negative results in your domain? And how about turning to slow science in your domain? And would it be possible or easy for you? Thank you, Anouk. Thank you, Paola. If there's no more question, we can end this workshop. Thank you very much, Anne-Catherine, Anouk, Paola. You will find the video and the slides on the For You Plus website. You have the link in the chat. And you can ask an attestation, attend the attestations if you want to your open science reference in your university. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.